Inside LI, a weekly webinar series produced by RichnerLIVE that brings together leaders from the business, government, and nonprofit sectors to address your most important issues and to answer your unfiltered questions. This week, we explore higher education on Long Island. We are honored to have a distinguished panel from the island's top higher ed and healthcare institutions. Dr. Aaron Glott, Chair, Department of Medicine, Mount Sinai, South Nassau. Dr. James Lentini, President, Molloy College. Dr. Christine Reardon, President, Adelphi University. Dr. Gabrielle St. Léger, Assistant Vice President and Dean of Students, Hofstra University. And Dr. Jermaine Williams, President, Nassau Community College. Welcome. Together, our panelists will explore the challenges facing and perhaps even new opportunities for students, professors, administrators, institutions as a whole, and yes, parents too, in the modern COVID reality. The effects of this pandemic will be felt not only by these higher ed institutions and students this year, but also by the communities and local economies that support these institutions for the years to come. We have been looking forward to having this important discussion made possible by our subscribers, advertisers, and sponsors who support our mission of bringing you honest local community news week in and week out. I also want to thank our panelists for their time this morning. Our host, Skye Ostreicher, will lead the discussion, and I encourage all of you, our attendees, to ask questions using the Q&A button on your screen. Please also feel free to email our team after today's webinar with feedback and to suggest topics for future Herald Inside LI webinars. Our Inside LI email address is insideli@liherald.com. I am excited for a lively discussion and will now hand it off to Skye and our panel. Skye, over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Friday morning. And welcome to Inside LI. This is our second episode of a brand new weekly series hosted by RichnerLIVE and Herald community newspapers. And today we're going to be talking about higher education. And as we've seen in the news, some colleges across the country, colleges and universities have been opening, and some of them have invited students back on campus and have already decided to shut down. So I'm here today with leadership from Long Island, Dr. James Lentini. Everyone's a doctor here, by the way, but myself. So Dr. James Lentini is a doctor of musical arts, and he, beyond being the president of Molloy College, is an internationally recognized composer. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
And Dr. Jermaine Williams, president of Nassau Community College, which has a student body of 19,000 students, full-time, part-time, and continuing education students. It's the largest single campus community college in New York State. Thanks for joining. Dr. Christine Reardon, Adelphi's first female president in the university's 123-year history, and she's also the co-chair of New York State's Restart Plan for higher education, which devised the guidelines that colleges and universities will use to reopen in our state. Thank you for being here. And Dr. Gabrielle St. Léger, she's the Dean of Students for Hofstra University. She's a Hempstead native, and she went to Uniondale High School. Thank you for being here. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Aaron Glott, who's a medical doctor. He's the chair of the Department of Medicine at Mount Sinai, South Nassau, and the chief of infectious diseases. He's also the hospital's epidemiologist, which means he's truly a public health expert and can opine on what these university experts are doing. Hello, I see a second person on the panel. Okay, and Dr. Glatt can opine on what these different universities and colleges are doing and why their plans may differ from other colleges across the country that have opened and now have shut. So I'd like to kick off this discussion really with Dr. Reardon, who comes from that Restart panel for higher ed, and talk about the plan and Adelphi's plan for reopening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Skye, and thanks to all of my fellow panelists for being a part of this important conversation. As Skye mentioned, back in April, the Commission of Independent Colleges and Universities decided to launch a task force to help with plans regarding reopening higher education in the state of New York. We have more than 100 private institutions in the state, along with the SUNY and CUNY system. And so we knew that collectively we have a lot of physicians, we have a lot of public health experts, and if we could bring all of the leadership together to talk about restart, that we would end up with a much better plan than if we tried to do it individually. So within the span of a month, we actually had more than 100 presidents and provosts from across the state, including the SUNY system, that participated in the design of what would be elements of restart plan. We also recognize that all universities and colleges are very different. While many people like to lump higher education together, you know, we range in size and magnitude across the state. So here on Long Island, we've got Webb Institute, which has 100 students. And in the city, we have NYU, which has more than 50,000 students as part of their reopening. So I think what we really focused on were building layers of safety and how a university could think about building layers of safety. And I'll certainly refer to Dr. Glatt to talk a little bit about the public health guidelines that go with that. But just to kind of provide the audience with a little bit perspective, for most universities, it's almost like opening a mini city. So within the state of New York, we actually have to abide not only by the higher education guidelines, but we have to abide by all of the other guidelines that may pertain to some of the things that we have on campuses. So we have hotels with our residence halls, we have restaurants with our dining facilities, we have daycare centers, we have transportation systems, we have sports teams, we have religious organizations. So we have retail with our bookstores. So every single state reopening guideline that we have an element of it on our campus, we have to abide by those guidelines as well as those for higher education. So I think the main levels of our plan, Skye, was really that each university needed to figure out how to build in safety, and it ranges everything from initial testing of students or symptom tracking all the way through how we design our classrooms and also how we operate all the different elements on our campuses. And I would say it's a complex process. I've got restart guides at Adelphi for every single one of those areas, you know, restarting in residence halls, restarting in dining, restarting in our athletics and recreation, restarting in the classroom. So we're concerned about the mission of universities in terms of delivering high quality educational experiences and thinking about supporting our student success. And at the same time, it is a complex question to be able to reopen universities.
Do you think that this restart plan incorporates additional guidance that perhaps other colleges that are now closing didn't have?
You know, we did it with two elements. One was to provide the state with guidance in terms of what we felt might be important components or critical essential components to have in a restart plan. And then the second half of the document actually is 60 pages worth of questions that we thought about in terms of every single element that you could touch on a university campus. We had questions that universities should answer. So within the state of New York, we distributed that plan widely so that people could go through all of those questions and really think through carefully what made sense for them in their student population. And so everybody's restart plan is going to look slightly different because we all operate differently, but at least we're using that set of questions that are helping us really think through what may be reasonable for us in terms of a restart. So we have distributed it beyond the state, but I do think that if universities had had a guide like that across the United States, they may have been, it would have been helpful, I think, for them to have that in guiding their restart.
And Dr. Glott, is this something that physicians weigh into? Is this something that you've been involved in this planning process with guiding colleges and universities with how to open?
So absolutely. And first of all, thank you for allowing me to be here today and to join this illustrious panel. In my life, I've also been an associate dean at New York Medical College. So we're very actively involved in education, recognize the importance of education, not only for medical residents and medical trainees, but in general for society. That's our future. If every one of the panelists here does the excellent job that they're doing, then our future looks bright. And I think it's critically important that we do have schools opening with real classes and not Zoom classes. Now, that may not always be possible, and there may need to be mixtures, and in some situations, like we had back in New York in March and April, it was extremely dangerous to have live in-person classes, and Zoom was the only, or technology similar to that was the only option. I'm hopeful that if people are very careful, and that talks about general society as well as the students in the schools, if general society takes this seriously, New York has taken it seriously to a certain extent, maybe more seriously than all the other states, but not seriously enough in my humble opinion, because we are seeing upticks in certain areas now. And I am very concerned that if the upticks continue, we will have no opportunity to have live classes. And all the planning that the wonderful panel for the state and all the individual colleges and educational programs have put together will be for naught if there is an uptick. And we have to make it as safe as possible, assuming we get to that point. And I think that the plans that have been outlined in numerous places, the CDC has guidelines, the State Department of Health has guidelines, the colleges have put together guidelines. I've been in touch with numerous schools helping them put together guidelines. The guidelines are excellent, but they won't be perfect. You can't make it perfect. It's impossible to have it perfect. But if everybody does what they're supposed to do, including the lay public, including the people that don't go to college but hang out with college kids, if everybody does what they're supposed to do in terms of maximally masking and socially distancing and taking this seriously, I think we can have a close to normal educational program for elementary schools, high schools, colleges, postgraduate, and we can get back to a somewhat normal educational program.
Now, this has to be really hard for students, and I want to talk to Dr. St. Léger about, from a student perspective, this is hard. College is a time where students get to know each other and socialize with each other, and there are a lot of parties associated with college, and especially when you're there with a lot of students all living close together. So what are you hearing from students who have now come back to campus at Hofstra? What are they feeling and saying?
Skye, thanks. Like everybody has said thus far who spoke, to be a part of this panel is really great to give that student perspective. We are in the midst, towards the end of our very stagnant movement process of moving in over 2,000 students on campus. And we have a great commuter residential population that's also in the surrounding community of Hofstra. And so we do have a responsibility not only to our residential students, but those students who are coming from other states who are coming to Hofstra and living in our local communities. What I've heard thus far is very similar to what I've read other institutions are dealing with regards to students really wanting that social atmosphere. You said it right, Skye. This is what they come to college for. This is why, as Dr. Glatt said, that Zoom experience doesn't give you everything that you can get when you come to a campus like Hofstra or Adelphi, or you come to Molloy. There's a reason why they're coming to campus to connect, to network, and to grow through social interactions. And so we're doing our best. But I will say this, Hofstra has put health and safety first in the midst of trying to do our best to provide a very social atmosphere without compromising health and safety. We have to put it first. And so students, most of our Hofstra students do understand why we are doing what we are doing. Throughout the move-in this week, earlier on last weekend, as parents were coming in, they felt safe. They saw the social distancing that we put into our protocols. They visibly saw a difference. Those who are returning students to the residence hall seeing move-in be different. And when we're starting off setting a precedence where social distancing is happening, we utilize our facilities to make that happen. Everybody is wearing a mask. Everybody is socially distancing and practicing the behaviors that we know makes a difference in keeping us here on campus. Then we can think about how to engage our students once we know that they can practice those behaviors. So that's what we're focusing on as administrators, and we're listening to our students. We're doing our best to hear what it is that they want to do, but we cannot compromise health and safety. And as a dean of students, it's one of the hardest parts of my job in this pandemic is to tell students that's not going to work, not right now. We have to keep our numbers low. You're here for an education, and we'll figure out how to make it work for you to have the social engagement that you want. And we need the students at the table to tell us what it is that they're desiring, so we're not planning things that they don't show up to. We're not planning things that are a waste of our staff's time and our staff's brain power to put something together that they're just not going to show up to. So we are engaging our students and trying to figure out what it is that we can do in a safe manner. And we are listening to them. Unfortunately, as a dean of students, I have that job to say that might not be able to work. And I'm fine doing that because my mindset is about their health and safety first. I want them to achieve, get their degree, and be alums of Hofstra. And so with that being the case, we're keeping that in every conversation we have with our students, but we're also welcoming their suggestions and seeing if it weighs out that if we can do it, we will. And if we can't do it, we won't compromise health and safety.
Yeah, and from a student perspective at Hofstra, Molloy, and the Delphi is different than a student perspective at Nassau Community, where students are coming and going, they're not living on campus. So Dr. Williams, what's going on in your neck of the woods with knowing that there's a lot of students and faculty that are commuting? And how do you contain this virus when everyone's running around, really?
Absolutely. I appreciate the question, Skye, and like the fellow panelists, I'm very excited to be here, appreciative of the invitation. And so we, as fellow panelists, and I think a lot of us and so many of us across the nation, we are putting health and safety first. That has been our paramount objective, and it continues to be our primary goal in regards to providing a high quality educational opportunity here at Nassau Community College. So we made the decision to have approximately 93% of our courses either remote or online, right? Because as you mentioned, we are large, and we know decreasing density is one of the primary ways that we're really going to address this issue, right? This horrible pandemic. So that means, roughly, 300 to 400 students at a time will be on this very large 225 acre campus. That is an extreme drop from where we would normally be. So above and beyond the actual going towards remote and online with 93% of our courses for the fall, we have implemented guides for both faculty and staff and students in regards to returning to work and returning to the campus, right? Guides that ensure they're, going through a screening app every day before they come to campus, and they're answering certain questions. We've also implemented, the CDC guidelines and state guidelines, as President Reardon was talking about, in regards to social distancing, face masks, hand sanitizing, these constant communications about hygiene, right? All these things that we know that are really going to address the issue. And furthermore, I would like to say, as round out this question, is really attempting to take a community-oriented approach to adhering to these health and safety guidelines. It's a collective commitment by the community. We all need to be accountable in regards to really maintaining the health and safety of our students, faculty, and staff.
And yes, thank you. And let's, Dr. Lentini, what's happening at Molloy? And Dr. Williams mentioned an app. And I know that at Delphi, there's testing and tracing and all kinds of technology on campus. At Molloy, what kinds of plan do you have there as far as technology is concerned and making sure students are safe?
Thanks, Skye, and happy to be here, and thanks for asking. So at Molloy, and I arrived here as a new president mid-June. So a nice way to enter the new presidency is with just a global pandemic, but I think we're all dealing with the same challenge, and where I was coming from in Michigan, dealing with very similar issues. But when I got to Molloy, what I found was they were already really, of course, well into planning and thinking about the kinds of daily screening that would happen, because there's a lot of discussion out there about testing and tracing, of course, and about the kind of other screening that you would do beyond that. And everyone knows about temperature checks. So what we're doing is before anyone, employee or student, enters a building, there's a very simple, almost looks like a mini iPad set up. It's a kiosk, and it connects to someone's ID, and it will be able to recognize, facial recognition, that person, connect it to their ID, and take their temperature immediately. And it's so fast that this is really almost, it's not cumbersome at all. So that information will be tracked every day. That's one of the technology pieces we're using. here. Obviously, anyone living on campus will be tested actually before COVID tested before they enter the residence hall. We had some triple dorms before we made those only doubles, so it's either singles or doubles that we have. So there are less living on campus. We have a lot of commuter students, but again, they will be doing the daily screening before they come to campus. And anyone coming from out of state, there's a quarantine rule that is implemented by New York. So we have good plans in place. All of us on this panel do. I think the questions being asked then, some institutions that we've seen, as we've seen in the headlines, are already in the midst of having students on campus. Some of those are very large institutions with lots of off-campus residences, apartments, etc. We feel like we can, at Molloy anyway, have a relatively good containment about managing students' interactions, and obviously this will be all of our challenge, but I do think, as was discussed on the panel, this community approach to it and everyone watching out for each other, using student ambassadors and those sorts of techniques will hopefully get everyone to be thinking very carefully and working with each other, because you can't police things every moment of every day. So we're going to count on everyone to work together to make this successful. So thanks for the question, and we're all feeling optimistic, but at the same time careful about how we're doing this.
Yes, thank you. And I'm just wondering, Dr. Glott, just from a medical perspective, these 4 universities and colleges now are reopening, and is there anything that sticks out on the forefront of your mind that other colleges did wrong that maybe these colleges know to do better going into reopening?
So I'm very impressed with the plans that all of the colleges have talked about. I would feel comfortable sending my children to those colleges that had put in a lot of time and effort into doing this. As I stressed from the beginning, I do think it's very important, recognizing it will not be perfect, to have kids go to college, in classes, in dorms, in the normal activities of college life, however, with significant restrictions, masking and social distancing. I cannot stress enough. That's how we're going to go and defeat this until we get a vaccine or until there's a miraculous cure. I don't expect a miraculous cure to occur. The drugs that we have in the pipeline aren't going to cure this. A vaccine might make a tremendous difference. We have a lot of stuff in the pipeline, but until then, and we're not talking about a practical vaccine available till really being distributed at the earliest would be 2021. It may be available towards the end of this year from study point of view, but practically to roll it out, it's not going to impact this semester of college. And each of the colleges has to be vigilant that they check and look to see where there are cases and to close down areas, pods, cohorts of classes as appropriate, maybe certain dormitories, maybe change around the way certain things are done. They have to be very quick to change. If we're stuck in saying this is the way we're going to do it, and no matter what, so then I don't think any facility that does that, whether it's a college, whether it's a place of business, whether it's a hospital, if we keep on doing the same things when we see the results aren't good, then we only have ourselves to blame. But I think having a dynamic plan in place, having experts that can make changes. The CDC has made numerous changes throughout this epidemic. If I knew now if I had the knowledge what we have now, back in February, March, we'd have saved a lot of lives. We were telling people, don't wear a mask. We've gone full swing in the other direction. And that's science. It's not an absolute. It's not always known. We're learning more every day. And kudos to all the educators these are very difficult circumstances. People don't realize how difficult it is to try to create a safe environment. And people have to understand that there may be some people, some staff, some educators that don't feel safe. And maybe there'll have to be accommodations for that great professor who he or she doesn't feel comfortable being in a classroom with 25, 20-year-olds or in a higher risk setting. And those professors may have to make modifications for. But not every scenario will be the same. And there has to be an interest and a willingness to modify, adapt, and change policies day to day, moment to moment. And I think if people have that willingness and that people have that knowledge and an expert panel to back them up, I think we can do this successfully. I'm hopeful.
And you mentioned dynamic change, and that's something where technology comes into play. And I know Dr. Reardon mentioned the technology available on campus as far as testing and tracing and how student IDs maybe won't function. You can't get into the library if you had a high temperature check. So tell us about some of those capabilities on campus now.
Yeah, so we actually have multiple mechanisms in place. We have an app, I think, just as Nassau Community College, where the students have to do their daily symptom tracker. It shows up green. If it shows up red, then they immediately call a public health team that we have in place now to help monitor this. We have set up technology dashboards as well so that we can look at the symptom tracking and how many people are coming on campus, and kind of knowing where they're going and the classes that they're taking, so that we can do the contact tracing immediately if we do have a positive case. We also have, just as Molloy, we've also put in temperature checks, at least in all of the residence halls. So that's also being tracked. I would also say, though, one of the things that we're doing is we've put in place people. So we immediately engaged our student leaders and our student government group to really help us be the ambassadors and to start putting out the messaging. And, you know, you start saying it's cool to mask up, and we're seeing a lot of our sports teams are showing that they're masked up and everything else. And so we started an educational program on campus throughout this entire summer. The other thing that we're doing is every university is required to have an on-site safety monitor. So we do have a couple of people who have been designated as that. But beyond that, we've redeployed our student ambassadors who typically are helping us with on-campus events and things like that. We're not going to be having events, but we're having them outside of each of the buildings. And they're going to be the ones checking the students to make sure that they've done the daily symptom tracker, checking them if they don't have a mask on. They're going to be helping us student to student going around and making sure that people are engaging in the behaviors that we're requiring. You know, I think everybody's hit it on the head. For us, it's a matter of the students complying with public health guidelines, both on campus and off campus, and who they hang out with off campus as well. I mean, Dr. Glatt said it best: if everyone in the state of New York complies with the social distancing and the masks, then we're going to see our rate of infection on Long Island and across the state continue to stay low, and we're going to save lives by doing that. So we're going to continue to really focus on public health education, the monitoring, using the technology to be able to easily track it and adapt, as Dr. Glatt had mentioned. And then hopefully our students will continue to, you know, wear the masks and social distance both on and off campus.
And as you can imagine, we've received a lot of questions both in advance of this panel discussion and now during the panel discussion that we're receiving. So I'd like to turn to some of those questions because there are a lot of them. And I know some of you mentioned you have children in high school and in college. And Jean asked, if you had a child in college right now, would you be stress-free allowing that child to live on campus, and why?
I do have two kids in college, actually. Well, one just graduated, and she actually sheltered in place in St. Louis for the end of her senior year. And I had to trust at that point as a parent that she was going to abide by the public health guidelines. You know, it was masking up, social distancing, not going to parties. And this was her final semester of her senior year, and she did it and did not have any exposure. And then I have a son who is a rising junior. He was planning on returning to his campus, and I was okay with that because I've been able to watch him as well during the spring semester being at home, complying with, you know, wearing a mask and social distancing and not partying. So I personally would have, but I also, my kids, I've been able to observe both of my kids engage in what I consider, you know, to be the high end of public health behavior. And I do think, at least for all of the panelists here, as well as my fellow presidents on Long Island, I know everyone is taking the highest levels of concern for safety and health of our entire community, faculty, staff, and students. So yes, I would feel very comfortable if my student wanted to, if my son or daughter wanted to go back into the residence halls. Dr.
Lentini, what were you doing?
Oh yeah, thanks. Well, I have a daughter entering high school here as well, and you know, watching the in-person and hybrid, but the intention is to be fully in person, and I'm supporting what they're doing. So yeah, we're living what we're preaching to some degree. And I had 2 children just graduate from college, and we're like everyone else in the conversion from face-to-face primarily to remote. And we were very confident with how the institutions handled that, and all the plans you're hearing now, I would feel totally comfortable sending my kids to college.
I would agree. While my 2 are younger, so they're not at the college level or high school age. I would definitely feel comfortable knowing the plans that I have seen, knowing that, excuse me, the individuals who have worked so diligently to abide by CDC guidelines and state regulations and everything, I would absolutely feel comfortable. And wanting, though, I would say, back to President Reardon's conversation, having that that detailed and intimate conversation with your student in regards to the importance of public health, the public health agenda, and your involvement in that. And I think that's an important piece, going back to that community, that collective impact of how we can really address this issue.
Now, Suzanne asked, have students had any involvement by way of surveys where they can voice their concerns for a safer return to campus prior to move-in? I know that's something that a lot of the campuses did, right, Dr. St. Léger?
Our SGA has been, and we have 2 councils that we actually utilize as our student voice. One is our SGA, senator-based SGA, and the other one is a university council that's part of our university Senate. And so these 2 student bodies, the leadership, they are the voice of the students, and we did run our standards by them. We utilize them. They're actually engaged in some of our subcommittees throughout the summer. We asked those students to be a part of how we were going to come back to the classrooms and what they wanted to see happen there, and their voice was at the table. So ongoing, yes, the Dean of Students account, as far as my email, is very full, and we are working through managing that and answering every question that comes in, not only from our students, but from our parents and from family members who are concerned about what we're doing and just have real questions that we really do need to answer. But yeah, our students were involved.
Absolutely.
We've also done lots of open Zoom calls, which I'm sure we all have, and I've been part of those to listen to parents and students give their feedback on what the plans look like, ask a lot of questions about it, what it might look like. We've tried to do videos, and there are more videos being produced about what is this going to actually feel like. Some of the differences are with physical distancing inside classrooms that they're going to be set up differently. So just the experience itself, just trying to make sure that people could ask questions about what that would be like. But we've done a lot of it during face-to-face interaction via Zoom anyway, and get the verbal feedback.
If I could add maybe just one point that I had alluded to before that I think is very important. I get many questions from people, rarely from college-age students. The questions I get are from the professors, from the teachers, from the faculty, the administration. Is it safe for them? Now, this is not to suggest that a 20-year-old is not, heaven forbid, at risk for serious problems. But in general, and I say this very carefully, in general, they're not going to be the ones that are going to run into the more severe medical problems. Let's hope that it stays that way. But just from a statistical point of view, it's the teacher, it's the faculty that's more of a concern. And I do recommend that faculty individually assess their risk and make decisions for their own personal health. It might be different than for a student, although a student who has underlying medical problems needs to discuss that with their physician, and he or she then needs to make appropriate medical decisions for that individual, just like we take into account various illnesses, various disabilities, and accommodate them. There may have to be accommodations here as well. For faculty that do have to go into a classroom, especially this won't occur in college so much, except maybe for special needs programs in certain colleges where the students can't be masked. This occurs more in elementary schools and in some special needs type of situations where the students cannot be masked, cannot control their secretions as well. So then I do recommend that the teachers not only wear masks, but they should wear a face shield. And there just was a paper published earlier this week that suggested that there's some support for that medically. I don't think this is going to occur in a typical classroom setting with the professor and students that are capable of wearing a mask. But in a situation, whatever that may be, maybe in some colleges, if you're in a music class and you're having the if you're having the students, they're all children today. Everybody's here talking about their children. I'm talking about my grandchildren, thank God. So if there are people in a situation where they can't wear a mask, the composers amongst you, right? You're blowing a wind instrument, you can't wear a mask. So in those situations, then people who don't have to blow the instrument, they should probably be wearing, in addition to a mask, considering wearing a face shield. And again, this is what I was talking about in terms of modifying and being willing to adapt different scenarios. If you're having a sports activity, it's going to be very difficult to wear a mask, depending on the type of sports activity. So each situation needs to be addressed. There may need to be enhanced testing in some situations. There's a lot of interesting technology coming out that might allow for more rapid and much less expensive testing. If we could do daily testing in a very easy and rapid way, that would be far, far better than temperature checking. So technology may come to help us with some of the answers in the near future, but not today, but maybe tomorrow, maybe next week.
And I think to Dr. Glatt's point, one of your points is this unfortunate situation has presented opportunities for us to rethink. And I won't speak for panelists, but reimagine, re-envision, whatever word we want to capture here, how we're delivering high quality and academic opportunity. And what we've done in regards to engaging students is identifying what that looks like from a distance. So asking what types of technology do they have access to, what do they need, and then providing them, identifying those gaps, and then filling those gaps, whether it be with laptops or Wi-Fi, things like that. The other opportunity that we noticed and that we embarked upon for several months is the training and development, the learning opportunities for our faculty and staff in regards to remote. So working with our Office of Distance Education and ensuring that our faculty members who had not taught remote before or only one or two courses had adequate opportunities to develop those skills. So there's lots of things that we've been doing, I'm sure across the board. So thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned, maintaining the integrity of the degrees. And I know that we have different universities and colleges here. And one of the questions that someone asked, Greta asked, how are you ensuring the safety and still keeping the integrity of our degrees now that everything's online?
I don't mind jumping on that one. I get asked this question a lot. One of the things that we've committed to, I think all of us, is we have the same professors with the same credentials offering the same level of instructions, different modality perhaps, but it's the same expertise. And the credential and the kind of teaching that everyone will achieve is taught by the same people. So we've prioritized making sure, with cost challenges and everything else that we're all facing, that we prioritize instruction and prioritize keeping those great professors in the classroom and helping them. I don't know if everyone realizes how much has been invested in training and retraining those faculty members, for example, on their own volition, by the way. They want to do this, where they weren't teaching remotely, let's say, as much. Really giving them as much training as possible, and they had time to do it this time. It's not like in the spring where there was no time. Everybody had to turn on a dime. This was very intentional, preparing for fall classes. So I have high confidence that the integrity of the education for our students is going to be very high. And and not only that, I would add to that all of the institutions represented here, it's not just the instruction that makes the experience. It's the advising, it's the support, mental health services, all these things that are still there. So, and it's a combination of in-person or virtual, but both are still accessible. So we feel all those things together. We have worked very hard to keep the experience at the high integrity. I think it's a great question, and we're confident that it will produce exactly what a student should get.
Because multiple people asked also, will tuition or fees associated with live learning be reduced in connection with remote learning? I know it's a tough question, because what you're saying is the integrity maintains itself, because the faculty is there and the staff is there and you've invested in them. So you're investing in the students, but people do have that lingering thought that it could be different, and will the tuition change?
It's a tough one. I'll mention quickly, others should weigh in. You know, we decided at Molloy to freeze our tuition. That gets, to make it clear, we didn't raise tuition this year. And almost in every year, higher education isn't a modality of just by looking at utility costs and everything else. Typically, there is some type of an increase in tuition, and we didn't do that. But for all the reasons I expressed and that you're alluding to, because there are no cost reductions for us, really. There's nothing. I mean, in fact, it's been more expensive because of all the investment in new technology, more technology, training, COVID-related expenses, upgrading filtration systems, all these kinds of things, which we've gotten some assistance from with the CARES Act, but not nearly enough to really make up for what is required. So,
I would follow up quickly and just, you know, at Nassau Community College, we're providing the same high caliber education, whether you're in the classroom or taking a course remote or online. The academics, they don't change. So we have an equitable approach to addressing and managing the situation. There are certain fees that we've eliminated or reduced, and that would, you know, depend on the student's experience. So certain, you know, whether, you know, labs may be a little different. You know, obviously vehicle registration, things like that. So we are taking a mindful approach to the cost associated in regards to fees and in regards to the academic integrity that does not change and that remains high quality. I'm very proud of that, as I'm sure the other panelists are as well. So.
Let's pivot now to student punishment, because that's what everyone's asking about now. Everyone wants to know how you're going to punish students if they have a party.
I really want to jump in here early on this one, because I'm having meetings with all my campus partners who assist in the educational developmental process that we have when a student bumps up against our code. My public safety, my assistant dean that manages our community standards, others who are helping me manage my off-campus students who are commuters. We're meeting, we are talking. And at the end of every meeting, so people understand our mindset, it's about the health and safety. I hate to say like health and safety, but my whole point is this. I don't want to curb a behavior just to curb it and punish a student. I want a student to understand their impact on the campus, on their suite mates, on their floor mates, on their housemates if they're living off campus, on their fraternity and sorority brothers, on the community, on their classroom community. They need to understand that at first, you're here and part of the pride, you're making that choice to come on campus. Yes, there'll be consequences and they'll be swift. That's not changing. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, we're still looking to change the behavior because we have a whole academic year to go through. We have to get through our first semester, and we need our students to understand their individual role. We approach it that way. And if it means that a student just isn't understanding their impact, then we consider what that means. And that might mean you should go remote and you shouldn't physically be with us, because right now we have a physical concern on campus and your behaviors are affecting that. And that's the approach that we're taking. And we will be swift because of the fact that COVID doesn't care about who you are and where you are. If you're not following what we know prevents it, then we need to nip that in the bud. And if you can't do that, then we have to consider the fact that you don't need to be physically here. You can still continue. We have all these other options right now, which is actually an advantage to me as a dean of students, where I feel a student can continue to get their degree in a way that works for their behavior. Because if the behavior doesn't match what we're trying to produce as a community as a whole, then we will do what we have to do to make those adjustments.
So case by case, but threatening to suspend or expel students.
Suspension and expulsion are part of our protocol and part of our standards, yes. It's a possibility, and I'm not gonna lie, but if you're egregiously going against what we are saying is the Hofstra Pride way right now, as we deal with this pandemic collectively, then you need to not be a part of us physically, because your physical presence is a hazard if you're not choosing to do the things that we know we all need to do in order to stay safe.
This isn't a problem just with college-age students. This is a problem, you see this unfortunately throughout the country. People break somebody's jaw because they asked them to put on a mask, walk into a store, and they shoot the clerk behind the counter because the clerk says, please don't come in the store if you're not wearing a mask. I think we all have to take a deep breath here. This is not a red versus blue issue. This is not a political statement. This is not a punishing statement. This is something that I try to appeal to people's kinder and nicer instincts. When you're wearing a mask, you're wearing it to protect people who can't protect themselves. Somebody whose immune system is not working as well as a 20-year-old because they're 60 years old, or because they have an underlying cancer, or because they have some sort of an immune disease, or they're taking medications, they're overweight, whatever the situation may be. If you're, thank God, healthy, wear the mask and say, thank God I'm healthy, and I'm wearing it to protect somebody's grandmother. I'm wearing it to protect my next door neighbor who survived cancer and doesn't need to die of COVID. And I'm hopeful that people are good in general. And college-age kids, the amount of nice things that they do is unbelievable. And I think we need to appeal to everybody to do the right thing, not that, well, you're a bad person, we're going to punish you. If you do this again, you're going to be thrown out. And we have to do that. I'm not saying that that's wrong. But I think we need to have campaigns. Say, hey, I wear a mask because I'm nice. At our hospital, we're putting on stickers on everybody, little buttons on everybody to say, I'm wearing my mask for you. And people need to understand that you're not wearing the mask for yourself. You're wearing the mask to prevent your transmitting illness to somebody else. And yes, you may get some benefit as well if somebody is sick around you. But if we inculcate in our youth, and I think you can do this, that I'm a nice person. That's why I'm wearing a mask. It's not a question of my civil liberties. It's not a question of how dare you tell me to do this. Wearing the mask is uncomfortable. Yes. Saving a life. It's uncomfortable to do CPR on somebody, but who wouldn't do that if they knew how? Who wouldn't jump in the lake and save a little kid that's drowning if they know how? But everybody can wear a mask. Everybody knows how. And I think it's very important that we have a campaign to positively wear masks, as opposed to you're going to be punished if you don't wear a mask. You're going to get into trouble. You're going to get fined. You're going to lose your job. You can't access the store. All of those are true. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. But I think we need to reverse and make things more positive and appeal to people's better nature. You know, we say do a mitzvah, do a nice deed. Wear a mask to do a nice deed.
Dr. Glatt, we should have you campaign around our campuses. That's what we're actually doing. We are really doing that positive messaging across all of the universities that are here and colleges that are represented. We are having our health ambassadors as peers do that messaging. We are looking to make sure our other student leaders engage as well and hold each other accountable. Our resident assistants in our residence halls have a huge job, a huge lift this year as they're going through and double checking and triple checking our students to make sure they're getting used to the behavior. Depending on what they did at home, I can't attest to that. But when they are on campus, we know what we're requiring of them, and collectively as a campus, all folks who are working here and all students who are enrolled, while you're on campus, we are collectively checking each other in a good way. They put your mask on.
Now, many medical professionals have said we are getting a second wave. Dr. Glott, are we getting a second wave?
So I think people have to understand it's not like the first wave is over and now we're in a calm and we're just waiting for the second wave to come. There are continuing cases in New York City. We have, thank God, done so much better from where we horribly were in March and April. This was, in my entire career, which the gray over here says it's been a while, I have never been as busy, as overwhelmed, and in some ways optimistic and depressed at the same time with what we went through in New York and Long Island as a healthcare system. Our hospitals came very close to breaking, and arguably New York hospitals are the best in the entire world. We have major institutions that came so close to breaking, having 2 people on a respirator in some institutions, so we ran out of respirators in New York in 2020. Who would have ever thought of that? So I don't think we're gone with the first wave. I'm not worried about a second wave. I'm worried about finishing the first wave and getting us out of the area that we're in. And we're seeing an uptick right now. People need to realize on Long Island, we're seeing a little bit of an uptick. In New York City, well, the numbers are still very good. I don't want to scare people, but I do want to scare people. if we're not careful, we will be back where we were. We may not be as bad as we were then because we know a lot more, and there is probably a certain level of immunity in New York because we were hit so hard, but not enough to prevent any significant potential for an outbreak. And certainly anybody who wasn't infected the first time could have all the horrible consequences now. We don't need a second wave. We need to finish the first wave, and everybody's responsible for doing that. I talk about the cardinal three things that a person needs to do: mask, socially distance, and appropriately wash your hands. All of those are doable by essentially 99% of people. Somebody who is capable of doing those three things should feel an obligation to do so to help other people. And we aren't as successful as we should be when you see people of all ages, not just young people, see all people of all ages partying together like there's no tomorrow. They may be right. There may not be a tomorrow. The thing that scares me the most is that if we see an uptick, we'll have to close the schools with all of these wonderful plans that have been made. We're not going to be successful in putting them into place because there's an uptick. The governor has warned who's going to do that.
That's my next question. I asked about the second wave because I want to know, for you campuses where students are living on campus, Alexandra is a college student who asked, what's the plan if I'm living in the dorms? Are you shutting down the dorms? What are the plans for campuses with students living on them if there's a second wave?
So we certainly have a lot more information, as Dr. Glatt mentioned. So I don't think we're going to go from 0 to closed all at once, unless we see a significant uptick, within Long Island, as an example. It's not completely in our control right now. I think, the plans are, if you have a positive case on campus and you isolate that, you trace it, and then you might, close a building for a particular day. We do have in our residence halls quarantine and isolation rooms that are set aside for any student that may have been exposed or who tests positive. And we've got, food services that are set up and health services that are set up and mental health counseling, so the student can still continue to function while they may be in isolation or quarantine. It's not always in the control of the universities as well. I mean, we do partner very closely with the Nassau County Public Health Department in terms of the actions that we take, but I do think that we know a lot more now. We know how to control and trace cases, and I think only at an extreme level. We do also say, and I will say this for all of the folks on this panel, we do have a strict requirement where we ask any student, any faculty, any staff to stay home if they're sick. If you have a cough, if you're sneezing a lot, if you have any kind of symptoms, we want you to stay at home. And we've put in place mechanisms, for a student that they can stay home and still take the class and not come onto campus. Or stay in their residence hall room, if they're not feeling well that day. So there are a lot of mechanisms to try to control it in a way that's much more effective than perhaps what we had to do back in March.
And Suzanne is another student who asked about students in performance majors like musical theater who cannot take classes that require them to be on a stage or attend a dance class, and how can that student stay on an academic track to graduate on time in an example like that? And I'd like Dr. Lentini to answer that question, since you have your doctorate in musical arts.
I do, and both of my college graduates who just finished, I had one finish a master's degree in violin performance and one finish in musical theater from Syracuse. And, this is a really challenging area, like clinical areas are as well. Nurses that need clinical experience and doctors have to be in the hospitals, residents' experiences. The performing arts maybe pose the biggest challenge for interaction in a closed space. So it's not an easy question to answer, but here's my hope that some modification in the delivery for this fall is certain. So you're going to have to, for example, with ensembles, there's a lot of thinking about how to space and instead of orchestra, we might break the orchestra into smaller groups, for example, and have really high quality experiences just with different kinds of repertoire, than they might have done in being able to squeeze 70 people into a room. Dance can take place, but it has to be, the spacing and everything else has to be appropriate. So we are building our plans that way. I know that It still might be not exactly what a student would have expected when they went into musical theater or whatever area, but I think that professors have worked very hard to come up with good plans for the first semester. We'll see what happens in the second semester, because as Dr. Glatt has mentioned, we are monitoring on a daily and weekly basis what might open up to us or could possibly go the other way. We hope not. But anyway, it's not really a satisfactory completely answer, but I do believe that really smart people in the performing arts have thought about ways to do this.
Now, you mentioned nursing also, and Angela submitted a question for Dr. Williams. Angela said her daughter is at Nassau Community College Nursing School, and she voluntarily signed guidelines accepting that she will return to clinical on campus. And she's wondering if she didn't accept and sign the paperwork, she wouldn't have graduated with her class. And how can you prevent that from happening for people graduating on time if they need to be on campus versus not being on campus?
Absolutely, and I appreciate the question, and it kind of harkens on the idea and the premise, the overarching goal of health and safety. Everything we're doing, the parameters that we're putting in place are because health and safety is paramount. So when we're asking students to complete an app, or we're asking them if they're in a specialized allied health or nursing program to complete an extra form, it's because these individuals may be going into places and spaces like clinicals where they're actually there's an enhanced opportunity for this situation to be a more engaged with COVID. So pardon me. And so we want to make sure that they're safe, right? So when we talk about allied health and nursing and those types of programs, what we are doing is, if students are not comfortable and or they can't, is we're working with students individually. So that's our approach, taking different strategies to ensuring students have that high quality education and they're completing their academic endeavors. So,
and as a final question here, an important question: with the pandemic coinciding with flu season, what will change, and will students and faculty be required to get the flu shot? So let's hear from Dr. Glott from a medical perspective, but then I'd like to hear on each campus. I remember I went to University of Miami, and on campus they did the nasal inhalation, I think was the flu shot, and that was it. It was very easy. It was outside the library. So Dr. Glott, what's happening with flu season? And then I want to hear what the protocol is for everyone getting a flu shot on campus.
So every year I'm an extremely strong proponent of everybody getting flu vaccination. This year, how much more so than ever before. And again, do it because not only you're willing to make sure that you don't get sick, but to make sure that other people don't get sick. The more people that have flu-like symptoms that come into the hospitals and practices, to the urgent care centers, the more they're going to be overwhelmed. Every one of them will need a flu test and a COVID test. It's going to overwhelm the system. So even if in general years you're lackadaisical about getting the flu vaccine, please get it this year. It's already available in local pharmacies, in many physician offices. I know our practices in our Mount Sinai South Nassau Health Network, we have the vaccine already. Please make an appointment, get your flu shot. A bright note, masking and social distancing helps flu as well. It will prevent flu. In the Southern Hemisphere, they are seeing the lowest recorded numbers of flu that they've ever seen in modern times when they reported this information. So an additional bonus of masking and social distancing is you won't get the flu, which is also a fatal disease. So a double reason to get flu vaccine, mask and social distance, prevent a lot of illness.
Dr. Lentini, what's the protocol on campus for the flu shot?
Well, Dr. Glatt just convinced me. No, I think we actually right now, as we're finalizing our protocols, have this question, and we are recommending and perhaps mandating the flu shot for everyone, and that's right. And we're going to make that decision in the next few days on how to word that, and things like religious exceptions and a lot of comes into this conversation, but we are going that route.
Dr. Reardon?
And we always do a big flu campaign on campus and make flu vaccines widely available to particularly our student population. We'll be continuing to do the same this year. We are ending our semester on campus prior to Thanksgiving, knowing that flu season typically peaks in November and December as well. And that was part of the strategy, was to try to, you know, help mitigate that interaction between flu and possibly COVID. So we will continue to push it. Dr. Glatt is exactly right. I think everybody should be focusing on how fast and going ahead and getting a flu vaccine if they can, because it's better for everyone to be able to do that.
Dr. St. Léger on Hofstra campus.
We actually just got our first shipment into our student health yesterday and refrigerating it, and we'll have several more come in. So we too are doing the usual, which is definitely having our campaign to make sure students know that it's available to them. And we are ending as well before Thanksgiving, all with the same ideology that we're going to try and do our best to avoid our students to even be exposed. And thank you, Dr. Glatt, for reminding us how we have a dual reason to wear the mask. And I'm hoping that we'll see a reduction for those reasons.
And Dr. Williams, is that something you'll have available to students?
So we'll continue to support quality public health education and promote items such as the flu vaccine, and work with local entities to provide that and inform students where they can receive. So absolutely.
So thank you, everyone. There still are more questions, but there will be as this goes on. And I appreciate our panelists and taking the time, and to all of our attendees for joining us on Inside LI, a weekly series. And our next episode will be on September 3rd, where we'll be talking about real estate and why the market's hot on Long Island. So thank you again, and best of luck, and may God bless us all. And we'll hear from everyone, and we'll continue to provide updates through the Herald, through Inside LI, and hear what's going on your different college campuses. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Skye.
Be safe.
Bye-bye.